God made man Lord of his creation, gave him possession and ownership of the world. And you have been so darned lazy that you have allowed the other fellow to run away with the whole world, and now he's bluffing you and telling you that the world belongs to him and that you have no part in it. I don't have to apologize to anybody for being black, because God Almighty knew exactly what he was doing when he made me black. If black people knew their glorious past, then they would be more inclined to respect themselves. Yes, you heard of Johnny Walker Red and black. Well, he had his adversities, but he's still going strong. Well, I intend with your help and God's grace to continue, because my work has only just begun. And future generations shall have in their hands the guide by which they shall know the sins of the 20th century. I know, and I know you too believe in time, but we shall wait patiently for 200 years, if need be, to face our enemies through our posterity. When my enemies are satisfied, in life I shall come back, or in death even to serve you as I served before. In life I shall be the same, in death I shall be a terror to the foes of us. Then count on me to be the real Marcus Garvey I would like to be. If I may come in an earthquake or a plague or a pestilence or as God would have me, then be assured that I shall never desert you and make your enemies triumph over you. Will I not go to hell 1,000,000 times for you? If I die in Atlanta, my work will only just then begin. For I shall live in the physical or the spiritual to see the day of Africa's glory. When I am dead, wrap the mantle of the red, the black, and the green around me, for in the new life I shall rise up with God's grace and blessings to lead the millions up the heights and the triumph that you well know. Look for me in a world when there is a storm. Look for me all around you, for with God's grace I shall come back with countless millions of black men and women who have died in America, those who have died in the West Indies, and those who have died in Africa, to aid you in the fight for liberty, freedom, and life.
Good evening, brothers and sisters. Welcome to our masterclass, our first masterclass for the month of August 2022. In tonight's class, we're going to be talking about the right message at the right time. I want to once again welcome you and let you know that we have a powerful evening planned. Our panelists this evening are our esteemed presiding bishop, Jeremiah Kamathi, and Pastor Swad Walker, and I will be your moderator this evening. Some of the things we want to talk about as we talk about the right message at the right time, we want to first start off with saying, who was Marcus Garvey? What is the UNIA and how did it grow so rapidly and become so big? What was it about the Garvey program that resonated with Black people? How did Garvey become so well known so quickly? This is before we had Twitter and iPhones and technology. How did he become so well known so quickly? What was Marcus Garvey's message? With all of this, how is it that Marcus Garvey and his accomplishments are not more widely known today and celebrated? So for those answers and other questions, we're going to turn to our panelists as we begin that discussion. I want to welcome you to tonight's program, and we're going to start off with the panelists dialoguing with one another and exchanging ideas. After that, we'll have a series of question and answers, period, and then we will have closing remarks. But once again, we want to thank you for being a part of this Woke Wednesday experience. So without further ado, let us continue. And I want to start with our presiding bishop. And we want to talk about some of the things that I brought up. We talked about, first of all, we talked about Marcus Messiah Garvey. Like, who is Marcus Garvey? And we know that Marcus Messiah Garvey created the largest mass movement of Black people in our history. His organization, the UNIA, the ACL, had over 900 chapters in 44 countries on 6 continents with over 6 million members. His organization came closer to threatening the international white power system than any other efforts. And in just a few years, Marcus Garvey was able to capture the imagination of a demoralized people and inspire them to believe that the total redemption of Africa and Black people everywhere was attainable. So when we sum all that up, I think we can say that Marcus Garvey had a correct analysis. That Garvey had a global perspective on Black oppression and exploitation. So Chair Moji, can you expound on that for us?
Yes, I'd be glad. I'm glad to be here. Hello to everybody. Marcus Garvey had a global perspective. Most of the perspectives dealing with Black conditions had to do with people dealing with what they saw, what they knew, what was local. Garvey's travels, first his readings, then his travels. Marcus Garvey traveled the whole world except for Africa. So he saw firsthand this constant refrain of Black domination and white subjugation, of Black people being powerless and Black people having power. And it wasn't a local thing in Jamaica or just a local thing in America or in the American South. He saw it in England, he saw it in Nicaragua, he saw it in Colombia, he saw it in Venezuela, he saw it in Panama, he saw it in the islands around Jamaica. He had firsthand knowledge of working with that situation. And when he went to London, he met Black people from all over the world who had come in from the British colonies. And he met and talked with them and found out it was the same problem all over Africa and everywhere else in the world. It was a problem of Black people being powerless and white people in domination. So that shaped his perspective so that what he said was, we are not oppressed because people want him to change his language and not talk so much about Black people. But he said, we're not oppressed because we're part of humanity. We're oppressed, we're lynched, we're burned because we're Black. And so any solution to the problem has to start first with us recognizing that our Blackness is the issue. And so his race first, that shaped his race first program. Being Black was the common denominator. And so Black people everywhere shared in that Blackness brought around a common oppression, and any answer to solving that problem had to start there.
Thank you. And I'm always astounded by the program that Marcus Garvey put together. And when we talk about, this is 100 years ago, 1920, the program that he put together. So Pastor Swad, could you tell us about the fact that he had a correct program? The Garvey created the first, I guess you could call it the first comprehensive program for Black empowerment and African redemption on that scale. Can you expound on that for us?
I'd be glad to. I just want to add to what our presiding bishop was saying about, Garvey's perspective, because I think a critical point in his life were those experiences growing up. He shares in his own writings when he was a child, growing up. Initially, the Black and white kids went to school together. And he said he was the most intelligent, he was the best athlete, he was all of this. But at some point, the white parents told their children they could no longer, interact with these Black children. And his question was, what the hell? Why is that? And it was at that moment where he noticed that his Black skin was viewed by society as a barrier, as something that was less than. But his entire experience as a child was never as less than. He was always the one leading the pack. And I think that's what really shaped his openness to be such a seeker. He lived in St. Ann's Bay, Jamaica, which was a port city. And so he took it upon himself, which is really a shout out to the importance of lifelong learning and seeking. He went and interviewed sailors to find out, about the Black condition of people all around the world, because he saw what was going on in Jamaica, and he later went and traveled the world, like our presiding bishop said. But even before that, it was those interviews with those sailors, and they would tell him, man, we're second, third class citizens all over the planet. And that did not sit right with his spirit, because he knew from personal experience, and he knew from the example of his parents that black folk were this lie of our inferiority was infuriating to him, because he knew that it wasn't true. And so that's what fueled the program that he put together. And, you know, many people don't realize that, you know, he was a huge fan of Booker T. Washington and the institutions that Booker T. Washington built. And what Garvey wanted to do was build those same institutions for Jamaica. That was his initial plan, to build a Tuskegee in Jamaica. But his travels and the fact that Booker T. Washington died before he could actually meet him had him expand his horizons, that this is not just something, like our presiding bishop said, this is not just a problem in Jamaica. You know, this is black folks' problems everywhere. And so when he got to the States and Harlem, I believe he saw the potential for global impact. But the program that he had was powerful, because what he was saying was institutions are, you know, where power resides. So much of what we believe in the shrines of the Black Madonna can trace their roots back to the Marcus Garvey movement. Hell, we call ourselves the Pan-African Orthodox Christian Church, which is a real shout out to the church that's most closely associated with Garvey's movement, the African Orthodox Church. But I'll leave it there because we have a whole lot more talking to do.
So I'm really excited about this whole exchange, because we're talking about his analysis and the experiences that in his life led him to do that. It's almost like he had a burning bush experience, as we talk about with Moses, you know, where he recognized that it was a call on his heart he had to do something about the conditions that face Black people across the world. And so when we talk about that correct program, it was so comprehensive. You know, like you say, he talked about the influence of Booker T. Washington, but he developed a fully comprehensive program that encapsulated the problem for Black empowerment and African redemption. Did you want to expound on that anymore, Jaramogi?
No, I think that captures it. If you look at the fact that the problem was rooted in race, the solution had to be rooted in race. It had to be comprehensive enough to solve the deficiencies between the races. It had to be comprehensive enough to get Black people, so that Black people would have everything that they would need to operate in the world. So he wasn't trying to integrate a coffee house or a restaurant or be able to ride a bus. He was talking about creating a world where Black people wasn't asking white people for anything, but was building what we needed to be appreciated in the world and be able to take care of ourselves.
And just like, you know, the words of our beloved founder, right, the Honorable Jaramogi Bebe Ajaman, who talked about the fact that, you know, God is more pissed at us for accepting our oppression than he is for white folk for oppressing us. Garvey had that same mindset. He never believed that God was looking out for us because we were oppressed. He was like, wait a minute, you know, God gave us the same abilities that God gave everybody else. So let's stop blaming white folk. Let's stop blaming this, that, or the other. If we would just recognize who we are, you know, like our presiding bishop said, and place race first, we are the authors of our destiny, not anyone else.
Yeah, and that's why, like you were saying, he took it a step further, because he actually said that by being disorganized and weak, we were inviting oppression. That we were the perpetrators inviting oppression, because if we wasn't disorganized and weak and individualistic, we couldn't be treated poorly, because people would fear us.
Yep. And that organization, right, was so critically important. And a huge part of the organization was the importance of symbols, to impart and implant in Black people this idea that we are not what society says we are. And, you know, we have to remember, we're talking about Garvey was doing this 50, 60 years just off the plantation. And so what he was doing was certainly the will of God, but those symbols with the Black Cross nurses and the African Legion and the Black Star Line and those parades during those Pan-African conferences, all those were implanting in Black people's minds, man, we are so much more than what these jokers are saying that we are.
Mm-hmm.
That's so true. And I think when we talk about the organizations, the Black institutions that he created, you know, because we talk about how power is not in individuals, but it resides in institutions. And we know that Garvey was so adamant about us being independent, about Black people that said, buy Black, be Black, build Black, you know, create independent institutions to serve the interests of Black people at a time when many thought that we had to depend on other people to take care of our interests. So can y'all go into that for us a little bit?
Well, Garvey's institutions, first of all, he conceived of everything that we needed. So, you know, whether that be the Negro Factories Corporation, the Black Star Steamship Lines, the hospital, the Royal African Legion, the Security Force, the Black Star Nurses, the youth program, all of it was to provide whatever we needed. He made clothing. He was talking about real self-sufficiency. They had their own grocery stores. And so he was creating the foundations of a nation. And like, he didn't have missionary outreach or anything, but what he did have was people paid dues of 50 cents a week, which amounted to what would be today $6 a week. But he also sold stock. He sold stock in the Black Star Line, and Black people bought stock, which gave them part ownership in the enterprise. So in the Negro Factories Corporation that employed 1,000 people, they were able to be paid because Black people bought stock. The reason that Black people were so enamored with the steamship line, the Black Star Steamship Line, was because it was their boat. Black people came from all over. When a boat was known to be docked somewhere near where they were, church groups used to get buses and drive from hundreds of miles to go walk on Black people's boat because they had participated in buying the boats. They bought stock in the boats. So Garvey's, it wasn't like Garvey was independently wealthy. What he was able to do was get Black people to invest in their own stuff at a time where they needed everything. And that included his newspaper. It was supported by the stock that people were sending in because they were proud to have something of their own.
And isn't it amazing, you know, how the press has always attracted Black nationalists. Malcolm X was the editor of Muhammad Speaks. Our beloved founder with the Illustrated News, Marcus Garvey with the Negro World, W.B. Du Bois with Crisis Magazine, Ida B. Wells with her institution, Frederick Douglass with his, that vehicle of getting that message out. And, you know, we were having a conversation yesterday, Jeramogi, you shared how the Negro World was literally, back in the day, you know, the modern, that version of social media. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, it was a form of direct communication. He didn't have to go through another medium for them to filter what he was saying, and he didn't have to try to wade his way through their propaganda. He could talk directly to Black people all over the world. The newspaper was published in English, French, and Spanish. And then for people that couldn't read, people would listen to it 2 or 3 times, memorize it, and then walk across the country spreading it to everybody through oral tradition. So this was going on all over the world. And we haven't had an organ that could talk to Black people all over the world with a singular message that could allow them to understand. Jeramogi Abebe used to say, the worst condition in the world is to be oppressed and not understand the nature of your oppression. Because if you don't understand the nature of it, you can't fight it. for the first time, Black people around the world understood the nature of their oppression and understood that it wasn't all that hard to reverse it if we just came together as one. So the newspaper enabled for that to be able to happen. And today's equivalent would be like if we had our own social media platform where we produce programming that went out across the world with a singular message, and that message would capture the imagination of Black people everywhere, cutting across political lines, class lines, tribal lines, cutting across everything to create a singular unity. That is ultimately what we want to do.
What I appreciate about Garvey, especially the Negro world, was it wasn't just him writing. It was him, and there was other incredible minds that were writing. Yeah. And it was articles on history. It was articles on, you know, contemporary reality, what was going on. It was poetry. It was all of those things. Yeah. He used all of those things to try to touch the hearts and speak to the hearts and minds and spirits of.
I'm glad I'm glad you brought that up, because there was a women's section as well. You know, where Black women leaders in the UNIA would also contribute, and they had a whole women's section with different women from across the country, lady presidents, as they call them, would send in articles as well to talk about how Black women could take a role in not just the UNIA, but in America and excel.
You preached about some of them sisters before.
Oh yeah. It's coming up.
And also, like you mentioned, Swat, he had some heavy hitters. I mean, he had Carter G. Woodson writing his history message, and Carter G. Woodson was recreating Black history at the time because there was no documented history, and he was writing his articles in the Negro world. Marcus Garvey stole half of W.B. Du Bois's staff because they got tired of the integration message and Du Bois's attacks on Marcus Garvey, and they went and joined Garvey. So it was the top minds in the country, and not just in America, but the top minds, Black minds in the world were part of the Garvey movement.
Yeah, and it's such a shame that Garvey and Du Bois were not able to find common ground while they were both living. You know, Du Bois later said, you know, he regretted his feud with Garvey, but Garvey was like, you know, and he said in that speech that we were listening to a clip of, he later said, like, any leadership that is going to call you to be dependent on another race is a leadership that's going to kill you. It's a leadership that is going to sell you out. We cannot have that. It's Africa for the Africans.
W.B. Du Bois said Garvey was either a lunatic or a traitor. And Garvey said about Du Bois, well, with Garvey, with W.B. Du Bois, I don't have that dichotomy. I know he's a traitor.
They still kept working. That was the main thing, that they were still working, even though they had a difference of opinion. They still, in their heart, both believed that Black people needed to be uplifted. Yeah, and that kind of inspiration.
The difference was the philosophy. W.B. Du Bois was an integrationist. And he believed in somehow erasing the anti-Blackness of white people so that we could live together. Garvey was not under any such illusion. He said we had to build our own, and if there was any hope of us being able to have mutual respect for each other, it would come in the future when we were so powerful they had to respect us.
And Du Bois was exercised of that mindset later on in life when he relocated to Ghana and said, Lord have mercy.
Exactly. He finally came to his senses. But I think, you know, that point you brought out, the fact that Garvey was such a bold and uncompromising visionary, that he inspired Black people to see themselves as full, capable, and dignified human beings worthy of respect from self and others. And that whole pageantry that he created, you know, with the parades, and you know, even today when I look at those pictures, I'm just amazed at the multitudes of Black people who, you know, were dressed out in all their regalia and just, you know, just wow, you know.
And he gave them royal titles, knights and dukes and duchesses and earls, and he gave those titles out to bestow dignity upon people for their accomplishment. It was it was necessary based on where we were as a people, that pomp and pageantry, those feathers and buttons. It was all a part of giving a debased people value and dignity in their eyesight and in the eyesight of other people.
And let's not forget that, because no one of us is an island unto ourselves, right? Garvey was influenced by folk even before him. David Walker, David Walker's Appeal, Paul Cuffey, Henry McNeill Turner, Edward Wilmot Blyden, who's really the father of Pan-Africanism. So Garvey was able to learn from all of these incredible giants and meld it together. But a huge part of Garvey's whole movement, which is totally missed by folk, is his theological impact. That's the thing that moved me to write that book, comparing him with our beloved founder Jeremiah Jubebe Ajamin, because the theologies were so similar and so powerful and so uncompromising.
Yeah, I think that it was very advantageous that Garvey's movement was a spiritual movement. It was a spiritual movement, and when people that attended them said it felt like church service, but it was inspirational. The Holy Spirit was in the room. You could tell from that speech that it sounded like they're at church.
Yeah, it did.
And so it said that spirituality imbued the whole movement. And a lot of Garvey's leadership were ministers, but because they found in Garvey's movement what they did not find in the church. They found the action to change the world with the Spirit, not just talking about some other people in some other part of the world through the Bible. They found what they needed for themselves. And so it's important to realize that it was a spiritual movement. And the Spirit was flowing. And that is really what was catching Black people around the world on fire, was the Spirit, the spiritual aspect. Now, Garvey was himself Christian, but he did not want, it was a non-sectarian movement. He thought that every religious tradition that Black people had anywhere should be respected, because all of them were just ways of communicating with God. And since we were doing the will of God, any one of them is good.
Yeah.
That's really important, because he didn't want to alienate any religious tradition. And I think for us, that's a lesson going forward, that all we're about is the liberation of Black people. And we really don't care what religion you're from, since religion is only a way of communicating with God. It's how you introduce to God, actually. And so it shouldn't stand in the way of our ability to be able to work with anybody from any religious background.
In those meetings at Liberty Hall, they were literally set up like church. They would have singing, they would have a message, and they would have an altar call. They would literally have an altar call. And when you joined the UNIA, you were put in catechism classes, basically CTG and BTG, right? To become a part of the movement. But, and I saw this as one of the biggest differences, because there's so many similarities between him and our founder. He didn't want the church to be central, but for very good reasons, because he had Muslims, he had folk who practiced traditional African faiths, Hindus, he had all these folk. And where our founder said, we have to have one organization that is central, but is willing to work with all people. So they're really doing the same thing, but coming at it, I guess, from kind of a different, a different angle. Yeah.
That bears some discussion.
Yeah.
Right. I remember having a conversation with Jeremiah Jubebe years ago, of course. But when I first found out that the teachings of Marcus Garvey were reflected in what we did, and also that Elijah Muhammad attested to that, the Moorish temple, different people, I think was Father Divine even followed some of the things that there were a lot of people who were influenced, or you said, under that umbrella of Black nationalism.
And you just talk about in America, because Rastafari movement in Jamaica, the Mau Mau's in Kenya, the African National Congress in South Africa. You know, like Garvey is the reason for everything.
Yeah.
It all sprouted from the seeds that he sowed. And that's why it's such a shame that he's not more well known and celebrated, because everything that we've done over the last 100 years has been rooted in Garvey's philosophy.
Yeah, I argue that two of the most influential and impactful Black souls globally, yet least known, Garvey and Jaramogi Bebe Ajman, for those two very reasons, because both of them have had international impact. But you know, the students that I have coming through my doors at UH, 90% of them have never heard of Marcus Garvey, and the few that have, all they've been exposed to is one line: back to Africa.
Yeah,
that's it.
We've had Marcus Garvey month back in the 90s, and that was supposed to be during the Afrocentric period. And a brother who was a reporter, he called the Culture Center and asked Bishop Olu, when would Mr. Garvey be in town, and could he possibly get an interview?
And I'm sure Olu said, "Oh yeah, just come on by."
Come on by. We'll
just come on by, brother. He'll be here. He'll be here. Lord have mercy. Lord have mercy.
So when we talk about all this, it puts me in a frame of mind that not only was Marcus Garvey an uplifting example, but he was really a best self practitioner, wasn't he?
Of course, absolutely. Marcus Garvey was an autodidact. That meant he taught himself. He started out, he was reading by the time he was 3. And that's all he did was read. He got bored of school because school basically had nothing to teach him, because his readings were so involved. It's like the author that's popular now, Ta-Nehisi Coates. People know that he went to Howard, but what they don't know is that he never graduated from Howard. He just went to the library every day and read everything about Black people there was to read. And that was his education. He still hasn't graduated. And now he's back there teaching. He still hasn't graduated. So Marcus Garvey is a lot like that, that he read and taught himself all kinds of things. He taught himself to speak. He was from a very early age, he competed in debates and took elocution lessons, were in elocution contests from a very early age. When he came to America, he went and interviewed all the great preachers and talked to them about their preaching style. And he didn't have that, he didn't sound like a West Indian. He didn't have that Jamaican twang. In England, speaking up in Hyde Park up under the street light, he learned how to sound like an Oxford scholar in England. And that is the way that he used his voice. And when he messed around and talked to those preachers and got up in 1917, when he first got back to Harlem after traveling the country, he was a dynamic speaker. As a matter of fact, he was advertised as the best speaker in the history of the world. And even J. Edgar Hoover, who was out to get him and hated his guts, told his people he is a mesmerizing speaker. And he had to be concerned with the Black people that he sent to hear Garvey. He had to be careful because he thought that if they heard Garvey, he would have to watch them when they got back. So
they would no longer be working for the government.
Yeah.
And just a quick aside, because you mentioned J. Edgar Hoover, I contend, like, if we're gonna name one person who was the enemy of Black people, my vote is for J. Edgar, because he was there trying to undermine our movement from Garvey all the way through the civil rights and Black power movements. But I've already given him enough time. But I mean, hell, he was a terror against us.
No, he believed that we were a danger to the country. and he deemed Marcus Garvey the most dangerous man in America, and then worked to sabotage his movement. That's the way he got a name for himself. This was before there was an FBI. He worked for the Justice Department, and he made a name for himself by destroying Garvey.
Yeah. And then we, at some point during this month, I'm sure we'll talk about how, you know, we ourselves, Black folk, were participating in his undermining, and how he was deported. And a lot of people think Garvey's story is over after he was deported from the United States. But he was in England, he was in Canada, he was organizing art festivals and concerts and movements all the way up until the day that he died. He never, ever stopped fighting and working for the liberation of Black people.
Yeah, one of his biggest convention was in Kingston, Jamaica. After he was deported, people came from all over the world to Kingston, and white people thought they had destroyed him, and he was bigger than ever.
And that kind of leads me to one of our last points, and that is that Garvey's legacy, his legacy, not just even the things that he did, but his legacy seems like it's more dangerous to the white power system than he was when he was physically here. The things that have gone on since then. Don't you think?
That's obvious because we're talking about it.
Yep.
We're talking about it today, and they're going to be talking about it 200 years from now. It's going to continue to inform and inspire and affect white supremacy wherever it is. And the fact that the Pan-African Orthodox Christian Church is modeled on the Garvey movement. It is a replica of the Garvey movement. The Christianity is more central, but the program, the philosophy that our founder laid down as the foundations of the nation, that is a direct replication of the Garvey movement. And Jaramogi was not bashful about saying it, that his parents were influenced by they were Garveyites. They were influenced by the Garvey movement. They raised him to be proud, to be Black, to believe that Black people could do things. And so he is very, very, very clear and always emphasized that we are a replica of the Garvey movement. We've made some adjustments and changes based on our circumstances and times, but Garvey is the thrust of what we are.
1924, he declared Mary the Black Madonna, Jesus the Black man of sorrows. 1924, this brother was doing that.
Whenever we see a movement going on with Black people coming together, you're going to always see the red, the black, and the green.
Lord have
Even
mercy.
if they don't know what it stands for, it's there.
Yeah, we have to work more assiduously on celebrating Garvey. We have to. Garvey is our Moses. He's our George Washington. We can't let people walk around and be ignorant of Garvey. We have to talk about him, celebrate him, and these month-long celebrations can't be us just talking to us. We got to turn them into the kind of thing where we're talking to the world about the greatest Black person of the last 100 years.
And it can be done, right? Because, I mean, I see this expansion just like the conversation about Juneteenth. You know, that started right here in the state of Texas and kind of slowly grew. But now we're learning so much more about Juneteenth from Dr. Gerald Horn from UH, right? That Juneteenth is really a celebration of Black self-determination. You were talking about that book that you were saying all of us should read. I don't remember the name of it.
The Insurrection of 1836.
Counter-Revolution.
Counter-Revolution 1836.
Yeah. But my point is the way that Juneteenth continues to grow, our conversation about Marcus Garvey can continue to grow and have that same kind of growth and impact.
Right. And right now, like I said, we could get into it further, but we promised everybody that we were going to have a question and answer period. So what I'm going to ask you to do, if you have questions, go ahead and raise your hand on the screen or either put it in the chat, and we will call on you as we see your hand up. I know Reverend Maya had her hand up early in the session. Did you have a question, Reverend Maya? You can unmute yourself. Unmute yourself, Maya.
She's working on it.
Thank you. Yeah, I was looking up the Revolution of 1836. Sorry, y'all. No, I was good. I was just going to talk about the Negro World, the newspaper, because I remember one year I was in the Auburn Avenue Research Library looking through some old issues, and I said, "Wait a minute, this isn't in English. Hold up, this is in a different language." And it felt so empowering. And even when Garvey was arrested, even those who talked against him said, "This is ridiculous. We may not agree with the man, but he does not deserve this." And so I think, even after a while, everybody had to come to their senses and say, okay, we don't agree with him. We might think he's a charlatan, but the way the US government is treating him is unnecessary.
Yeah, even the New York Times said that.
So this has been very informative. Thank you all. Thank you.
Questions, hands up.
If no one has a question, I have a question for our presiding bishop and for everyone else. What did y'all think of hearing Garvey in his own words?
I wanted to join. No, it was very inspiring. And what you don't get out of the printed words are the inflections in his voice and the way the feeling that you got from his talking. You get feeling from his reading, but you can feel his soul when he's talking.
Yeah.
Reverend Kapinse.
Everyone, and thank you for a very informative presentation. Yesterday, there was an important congressional election, and unfortunately, at least in my opinion, as of January the 1st, we will have no Black representation in Congress after 67 years. And I was just wondering if the panelists could provide a context through the lens of Marcus Garvey, his philosophy, and the Pan-African Church in terms of the implications for this. Thank you.
Well, things are going to get a lot worse before they get better. But because Black people have been like in this fantasy land since 1954 with the Brown versus Board of Education decision, that somehow we are going to be able to be absorbed into America and be treated as full citizens. And that is going to be our salvation. And as long as we have that position, we're gonna get disappointed time and time again. Politics has never satisfied the wishes of a suffering people. Politics is a poor vehicle. Politics is to buy you time, to get you better conditions, but it's not gonna solve the problem of oppression. Now you're talking about the blackest city in America having no congressional representation. That's on us. That's a shame. That's because we talk about being woke, but we ain't woke. We still sleeping and hoping that somehow Biden or Pelosi or somebody is going to do for us what we're going to have to do for ourselves. And it's part of the growth process. Garvey's movement grew because conditions had gotten so bad that Black people just didn't have anywhere else to turn. They tricked them, had them to go to war. They came home, they lynched them with their uniforms on, tried to make them go back down in the cotton fields, didn't change anything. They were still not allowed to do everything. They still had bad jobs, still living in poverty. Everything was, Black people were betrayed and at the lowest possible point. At the time of 1920, there wasn't one free Black country in the world. And so Black people were totally demoralized. And that's why Garvey, in 2 years, had 2 million people. From 1917 to 1919, he had 2 million people. It was because of the desperation. Circumstances where we are today are going to become likewise desperate. We're going to go through some hard times as white supremacy tries to hold on. We're going to have to go through a process of understanding we don't have no rights unless we got an army and a navy. There ain't no justice unless we got an army and a navy. We don't have any right to anything unless we can produce it, own it, and control it. And that's our only option. I don't mean to get carried away, but we got to come to the point where we realize we got to make it happen. And it can't be a few people doing a little. It got to be a lot of people doing a lot.
That sums it up in terms of our response to that. And I think that's one of the things that Marcus Garvey kept emphasizing, that we had to do for ourselves, that we couldn't depend on other people to look out for our benefits, that we had to come together and do things for ourselves. So if there are no other questions, I don't see any other hands up at this time. We have some closing. Okay, go ahead.
Real quick question, just to the panelists in general. As it was mentioned, Reverend Sward, that Marcus Garvey was doing about 50 years or so removed from slavery, that impact. So how important do you think the African retention that our people maintain even during slavery provided fertile soil for Marcus Garvey to deliver the type of message that he did, and for it to fall on fresh and fertile soil with our ancestors?
I think it was everything. And I think that even with the Europeanization that we've all gone through, there's still that African DNA that is in us that can be tapped into. But we have to speak the language, just like our presiding bishop was saying. We've got to speak that language and speak truth to power. But even more powerful than the words that we speak are the deeds that we speak, right? When we can show our people that, we can do more together than we can apart, that these institutions that we're building can make your life better. I think that will resonate, and folk will see it. They'll actually see it, and they'll be able to hear it even clearer. That, this whole idea, we're always talking about I am because we are and all. No, we actually see that it actually works, but it's there, it's in us. I mean, we know it's in us, right? I mean, any event that you go to where they're playing the drums, you see Black people, even if they're not tapping their feet, you see them move. And I mean, that's as African and as foundational as it gets. It's in us. We just got to make sure that we're speaking to it when we're preaching, when we're meeting with somebody, however we're interacting. We got to speak to that because it's in us.
Yeah, and I would add to that our problem going forward is we put a liberation movement inside of a church. Mm-hmm. Now the church got us captured. The liberation movement can't get outside the church because people think we just a church. We a liberation movement, and you can't know more about the Bible than you know about Marcus Garvey. We're captured. We're captured by our beliefs, and we can't tap into that thing you were talking about, Aswad, that Africanness, that foundational spirituality is not about religion. Spirituality is your whole way of life. And Black people have this common DNA everywhere in the world, no matter what language they speak. That's what we have to tap into. We do better to throw away the organ in church and use the drum. Because we have to tap into that Africanism if we're ever going to get back to the people that we already are.
Amen and Ashe.
All right. Wish we had some drums now. But we're going to have closing remarks. If you can just, I think, it's like we said, this discussion could go on. We could talk about this all night and get more fired up as we go on. But if you want to just briefly summarize our thoughts from today, we talked about the right message at the right time. One of the things that was foundational to what we talked about coming into this whole discussion on the master class is that we had a triangle, the core triangle, mind, body, and spirit that we were talking about, that we had to focus on creating strong minds, strong bodies, and a strong spirit in order for us to actualize ourselves, be our best selves. But how would we, we talk about mind, body, and spirit. What do you think would be your closing thoughts? And I know one of our participants said, wait a minute, don't we talk about taking that organ out of church? But
I was speaking figuratively.
because you know we're gonna get our song on my ear.
I'll say something first because I'm not going to try to follow up our presiding bishop. I'll just say that.
Good choice.
Yeah, no, right. That one of the many things that Marcus Mosiah Garvey and Jeremiah Jabebe Ajban had in common was fiercely important to both of them was this issue of authority, that we have to recognize our own authority, that it is suicide for people who are being oppressed to then wait for the approval of the oppressor to tell us which way we can fight that oppression. Like what is okay for us? What is the okay and acceptable way to fight back? To hell with that. Both Garvey and our beloved founder were all about accepting our authority, divine authority, God's authority within us. To hell with what other folk are thinking, because we've got to focus on what God wants of us. And that's foundational to everything that they ever did.
Yeah, I agree with that. Jeremiah introduces the book Black Christian Nationalism. His introduction has to do with authority in the Black Revolution. He said, we can't really do anything based on other people's reference points. We have to refer to ourselves. I mean, when he says that the will of God is revealed in the experience of a people, we have to look to our own experience for what we need to do. And I'm going to end with this. Things are going to get much worse in America. I mean, much, much worse. You think people are losing their minds now? It's going to get much worse. And the pressure is going to force people to look for answers. Our challenge at this time, because we have the right message at the right time, is to organize ourselves, stop arguing with each other, organize ourselves so that we can be the vessel that can receive all of that energy and anguish. When people are looking for something, something has to be there as a possible answer. We have to be able to present ourselves as that answer. Now, everything else, us arguing with each other and playing around and having petty disagreements and plantation politics, this is our time. We have the opportunity to offer answers to people. And if that happens, we're not going to grow in a linear fashion. We're going to grow exponentially. So the question becomes, how much capacity do we have? How much capacity do we have? I dare say that 20 years from now, our best and most committed members will not be people who have been part of the church traditionally. Because the sense of urgency and the problems in the world will cause them to latch on to what we're about in a new way and take it to the next level. We have to understand that we're laying the groundwork for that. This is not time for retiring and sitting around and going into our sunset years. We got work to do. We didn't finish the job. We got to finish the job. We're in the fourth quarter. Time is running out. We got to finish the job. We got the best answer for Black people in the world. We got the right message at the right time and the right program at the right time, and we have to let somebody know we got it. I'll end with that.
That sounds like just the beginning. Woo! All right. The right message at the right time.